Okay. I want to thank Christina for inviting me to this conversation. I'm learning a lot already. I think we're going to have quite a bit of discussions. Okay. I'm going to change gears, and I want to present these ideas of the pluriverse and political ontology in relation to a topic that is becoming very present nowadays. There is this idea and concept of the Anthropocene. Supposedly, we are living in the Anthropocene, which is a geological epoch characterized by the scale of human impact over the planet. Humanity has become a geological force, reshaping the Earth's geophysical cycles. Chakrabarty pointed out that in the Anthropocene age, the Earth is no longer the stage of the human drama, but what is at stake on it. For many analysts, the implication is that the status of the planet becomes an object of human design. Inadvertently, humans redesign the planet in dangerous ways. Now we have to do it consciously in order to avoid the dangers ahead. Not everyone agrees with this characterization, but it makes quickly evident two fundamental questions that the Anthropocene raises. What is to be redesigned? Basically, what is the core of the problem? And how can a unified conscious agent be constituted to undertake this redesign? The first question elicits a variety of narratives about how we and the planet ended up in the present predicament. The second elicits a discussion about the meaning of politics in the face of this predicament. I would like to discuss three kind of takes that are being articulated to these questions, to then essay a fourth one, what I will call the pluriversal proposal advanced by political ontology. The first take builds on a story that goes like this. The human species abandoned its state of animality through a culture that evolved from hunter and gathering to agriculture and then to industrialization. At each step in this process of cultural evolution, we, humans, increasingly transform the natural environment without much concern for the consequences. But with the advent of industrialization, this process intensifies in speed and magnitude. The Anthropocene marks the moment when the consequences of human activity are of such a scale that can no longer be disavowed. Awareness of humanity, geological consequentiality grounds two slightly different approaches along this storyline. Seeking to balance the human needs and the needs of the environment, on the one hand, or to radicalize the application of technology within a logic of complete human control of the planet. According to this storyline, the failure of design, of which the Anthropocene is a consequence, is to be found in insufficient and fragmented knowledge paired by an insufficient and fragmented governance system that is ill-suited to respond to complex flows of information. In the dominant version of this storyline, that goes under the general rubric of Earth system governance, the solution is to return or remain the closest possible to Holocene conditions. Paradigmatic interventions are the various mechanisms created to achieve a carbon-neutral global society, from decarbonization of energy supplies and the creation of carbon markets to RED projects, the so-called RED projects. The other version building on these storylines sees insufficient knowledge and governance not as a failure per se, but simply as a moment of awareness of what we lack to continue with the species' logical conclusion of its evolutive drive, the total control of the Earth. The paradigmatic intervention in this case is geoengineering. In both cases, the solution proposed to the problem, thus defined, involves the integration of knowledge from the natural system and the social system through various mechanisms of governance and decision-making, articulating the various levels of government of the international system of nation-states, as well as actors from private and civil sectors. In other words, there is a consensus around the political community or subject that will carry out the solution or response to the Anthropocene. It is humanity, through its recognized representatives. The challenge in this version then boils down to the articulation of different stakeholders' views and interests. Now, the second take hinges upon a critique of the assumption of an unproblematic political community, that is, the human species. Succinctly, the argument goes like this. In presenting the Anthropocene as the result of the whole species activity, the dominant storyline glosses over that A, human groups contribute to and are affected differently by the Anthropocene, and B, that those inequalities that are part and parcel of the driving causes of the Anthropocene are inherent to the social natural configuration called capitalism. Without necessarily addressing the evolutionist storyline of the previous approach, it is accepted that the Anthropocene imposes itself as a challenge to all of humanity. How will relate the human system, the human social system, with the earth systems, of which it is a component? But as Slavoj Zizek, one of the prominent voices in this critique, posed, the social system, has to be remade so that we can fix the whole, the planet. Insofar as the dominant responses to the Anthropocene entrench rather than challenge the capitalist socio-natural formation, environmental concerns operate as the new opium of the masses, as Badiou has said. A perfect example of contemporary post-political order. The idea of post-politic builds on Rancière's notion of politics that Hans Martin just presented as a dissensus, which flags the problematic constitution of the political community. Very briefly, Rancière postulates a distinction between the properly political and the police. The police is the always contingent instantiation of the political community, a partition of the sensible, he calls it, where we can discern the constituents that compose society, their roles and parts. The properly political, then, indexes the lack of foundation for any particular form of allocating roles and parts to be recognized, to the recognized constituents that form a political community. There is always a tension between the police and the political in that sense. For the political always haunts the police with the possibility that the partition of the sensible could be otherwise. This tension sometimes erupts and a repartition of the sensible takes place. This is, according to Rancière, the properly political moment. As you can quickly infer, what makes dominant responses to the Anthropocene part of the post-political order is, first, the assumption that the current partition of the sensible, with its representative institutions, accounts for all who matter in the definition and solution of the problem. And second, that this definition and solution of the problem is presented as having no alternative. It is supposedly the realist way to go about this problem, or we are doomed. That's the only way to go. Now, there is a third take on the Anthropocene that eschews the evolutionist storyline, question its basic premises, and send us right back to the design board. The Anthropocene here is seen as the consequence of what, following Latour, we can call the modern constitution, that established a fundamental divide between nature, an external mute and inner reality composed of non-humans, and culture, the human perspective on that reality. Humans could dispute their perspectives, and that was politics. But nature, the objective reality, is independent and impervious to those disputes. Precisely because of its independence, nature or reality was implicitly assumed to provide the stable grounding and stage for human political community, or at least the limits for its manifold contingent manifestations. Ultimately, no political community and its dramas can exceed the edge of the stage that nature or reality provides. The assumed exteriority of nature provided moderns the vision of a paradise at the end of the road. when everybody was educated to recognize the sovereignty of nature via its privileged spokesperson, that is science, disputes will end and a true community of humans will arise. But the consequences of treating non-humans under the label of nature as an exteriority independent of the human's dramas have piled up to the point that this very assumption has become untenable. Thus, rather than a paradise, what we have is the Anthropocene, which basically marked a rebellion of the non-humans, a proliferation of disputes, and an expansion of politics. In effect, using the post-political lingo, this take on the Anthropocene will sustain that what we are witnessing is a political moment where the partition of the sensible has been put under question, where the part that has no part, that is, the non-humans, are claiming a part in the political community. This does not mean that attempts are not being made to suture back the political as usual, as the post-political critique is pointing out. But the results of such attempts are still to be seen. Opium or not, non-humans have shown they are not easily placated once they rebel. The recognition of the agency of non-humans grounds what we might call, following Latour, a compositionist proposal. If we want to survive, we have to compose the political community right, that is, including the part that had not part in the previous constitution, that is, the non-humans. The challenge here is how to compose this community of humans and non-humans. Now, the tropes of multi-species and more than human assemblages signal the conceptual work that is going on trying to address this challenge. However, if we attend carefully to the devices that help constitute these tropes, it is evident that the natural sciences are still conceived as the predominant spokesperson for non-humans. In effect, the narratives of multi-species and more than human assemblages abound with references to biology, physics, and the like. Thus, I surmise that while the compositionist proposal might be signaling a deeper rupture of the police order than what post-political views will recognize, it is nevertheless quickly moving in a direction that contains a rupture that goes even deeper. I will return to this point soon. Now, while the differences between the three takes I have sketched here are not irrelevant, they all agree that the scale of the Anthropocene as a problem demands the constitution of a subject that matches it, a global subject or political community to confront a global problem. Whether through better integration of knowledge, political revolution, or composition, the task of the collective subject, it seems, that is to be big redesign. As many others, I'm wary of big design and find more promising path in the aggregate result of the rather uncoordinated and more heterogeneous self-sustaining practices of what I call emplaced collectives. In contrast to societies or communities that refers to association of humans, collectives gather together and in unique configurations, entities that for moderns pertain to either nature or culture, but which in the emplaced collectives are neither. Thus, emplaced collectives are not cultural communities that live in natural places, but heterogeneous assemblages that take place in specific locations, have their own forms of self-constitution as well as spokespersons. The uncoordinated and heterogeneous self-sustaining practices of emplaced collectives I referred to above usually become notorious when they come to collide with the practices that negate them. Paradigmatic examples are resistance to mining, like the one our colleague Marisol de la Cadena has discussed in a famous article of her on cosmopolitics in the Andes, as well as other conflicts around development projects that profoundly alter the conditions of possibility of the emplaced collectives. Now, the specificity of the emplaced collectives foregrounds the myriad ways in which political communities can be composed beyond the human and the very specific notion of the non-human that can be certified as existent by the natural sciences. This is one of the elements that constitute what I refer above as a potentially deeper rupture of the police order than the one recognized by the compositionist proposal. It is not simply a matter that a recognizable part that had no part, non-humans as other species or artifacts, is now claiming its part. Rather, something we have no concept to refer to is erupting as well. And place collective is my terminological clutch to try to index this unknown. But there is another sense in which I think the rupture implied by the activations of place collectives is deeper. They point towards a form of politics that is not oriented to the composition of a community or a common world, but rather is oriented to the proliferation of myriads, highly localized communities or worlds. And I think that it is precisely the suppression or disavowal of the specificity of these worlds what constitutes the Anthropocene as a problem. My positions take inspiration from a set of insights that I first encountered through my work with the Shiro people in Paraguay, but later found in different guises in the work of many indigenous intellectuals of the Americas, who conceived reality or life as the unfolding and always changing story of a creative force or principle at a magnitude beyond human cognition. In this conception, and through their specific configurations, trajectories, and reciprocal relations, all beings, and by extension what I call emplaced collectives, co-contribute to this unfolding story. Therefore, disrespecting the trajectories of other beings and emplaced collectives, and abusing the relations that sustain the flows of the story invariably have negative consequences. As a corollary, a good life implies sustaining one's in-place collective by creatively moving along with all the others so that the flow of the story continues. From this vantage point, the unruly heterogeneity of in-place collectives and their worlding practices is the basic condition for a lively planet. The Anthropocene then appears as a symptom, the result of a modernist vision of a good life that conceives itself as universal, that is placeless, and that has no regard for the practices of worlding of other in-place collectives. Thus, rather than big redesign, it is the unleashing of the heterogeneity of in-place collectives what the moment requires. What is required is not the composition of a common world, but the enactment of the pluriverse, which cannot be other than the enactment of multiplicity and divergence. This is what I will say, finally, that is the key political orientation of political ontology and the pluriversal proposal.